Greetings everyone. Welcome to the special segment of Symbolic Expression series. The topic of today's lecture would be Economic Rights of Women in Early India. When we use the term Early India, it refers to the time span from prehistoric period to roughly around 7th century CE. The lecture focuses on the economic rights of different categories of women like unmarried daughters, women at marriage, after marriage, wives, widows and prostitutes. Various ancient texts like the Dharam Sutras, the two epics, Buddhist and Jaina literature and the later Dharma Shastras, they all indicated that women's labor at home, however heavy, was regarded as unproductive. Women's sole worth lay in their reproductive role, and even there she was seen as the field, the harvest belonging to the seed owner. The anxiety to leave the property to the legitimate heir led to stricter confinement of women in the inner apartments and greater vigilance by the male members of the family. Women skilled only in the domestic chores were economically a burden to their husbands. Here, one can also mention the comparison between a son and a daughter. The literature of the time categorically called the birth of son a blessing, while a girl child was considered as a curse. Some exceptions like Atri in the late Samhita, however, says that a maiden had a share in her father's, brother's or ancestral property. Then one can also mention a series of lawgivers like Manu, who laid down that Brahmin brothers should separately give a quarter of their shares in parental property to an unmarried sister. Gautama claimed that unmarried daughters not well settled in life shall inherit the property of their father. Then Taittiriya Samhita around the 8th century BCE says Striyo Nirindriya Adayadha, that is, women in general and sister in particular are not entitled to a share of the family property. If we talk about the different forms of marriage, most of the 8 forms of marriage, it was the bride's father who paid the groom's party, except in the Asura form of marriage in which payment was made by the groom's parents to the bride's parents. In the other marriage types like the Brahma, Daiva, Arsha forms, the bride's father had to give wealth, ornaments, a pair of oxen or other gifts according to his ability. The bride's wealth or istridhan could be of different kinds like pana, with which the bride was purchased, then yautaka or the gifts that were given to the girl at marriage by her relations and friends, and then it was shudaika or gifts that had been given to the bride or to the couple either at her or at his place by the respective family members and the relations. So we see that there was a considerable dichotomy of dowry and bride price. Society largely disapproved of the bride's father accepting money from the groom's family. Manu in fact had claimed that a father should not take any bride price or kanya sulka, for by taking a dowry or a kanya sulka out of greed, he became the seller of his offspring. But a similar kind of advice was never given to a groom's father. Even the acceptance of a pair of cows and bullocks by the father of the bride from the bridegroom was designated as a dowry by certain authorities and was not approved of. However, there is no text forbidding the groom's father accepting dowry, and that transaction was never described as a sale of offspring. So, we see that dowry came to considerably demote women socially. It signified the social demotion of women, for when a man marries, he saves a girl from the situation of maidenhood. So, therefore, her father had to pay him a price for this deliverance or this special service that he was offering. So, a desire for ostentation and display kept on increasing with time. Manu, who along with the Bhagavad Gita and Vatsyayana was a formidable influence over society in the early centuries AD and continued to influence society during the following millennia as well. So, Manu enunciates the different forms of marriage, in the first three of which it was the bride's father who paid money, gave gifts to the groom. Only in the Asura form it was reverse, and the name of this particular type of marriage as Asura can be traced to the Dravida countries where it was widespread until a couple of centuries ago. However, dowry could not be considered as Istridhan. The dowry that was paid by the bride's father was given to the groom and to his father and other family members. So, therefore, it did not constitute as part of Istridhana, and therefore, the wife had hardly any say over it. Gifts that were given to her by friends and relations at her parents' house were, however, known by a different term, that was Yautaka. There was a text by Aparaka which said that the Saudaika was under the full control of the wife. She could sell or give even immovable property. Neither the husband nor her sons or her brothers could take it, as the woman had complete control over it. However, dowry was not Istridhan because it was given at the instance of the groom's father. Now, if we discuss as to what was or in what ways husbands had right over the wife's property, then here Yajnavalkya indicated that a husband is not liable to make good the property of his wife taken by him in a famine or for the performance of a duty or during illness or under restraint. So, these were some of the special circumstances under which a husband could even claim the wife's property, and he was not liable to give any justification for doing so. The separate property of a childless woman married according to Brahma, Daiva, Arsha or Prajapatya form of marriage went to her husband. So, society just could not visualize or tolerate a woman handling her own personal property. The Maitrayani Samhita, which was a later Vedic text of around 8th century BCE, indicated that the relations of a woman who live by selling carts, clothes, ornaments, etc., which earlier had been Istridhan of a particular woman, were committing a grave crime, and it was a sin for which they would have to suffer. Katyayana further stated that what wealth a woman earns through her crafts or what is given by others out of love, all that wealth ultimately belongs to the husband. So it was a cruel realization that what she earned herself was not her own, and what remained as Istridhan was quite less. Manu had indicated 6 sources of Istridhan at marriage, during the bridal procession, gifts that had been given out of love from brothers or from parents. And another statement that came after this description was that a wicked spendthrift wife had no right even over her Istridhan. It was for her in-laws to decide that whether a wife was spendthrift and whether she was deserving enough and capable enough to manage her Istridhan, or it had to be snatched away from her what legally belonged to her in the first place. So the Istridhan or Saudayika or Yautaka was theoretically entirely her own, but the consciousness that had been shared by society and the women themselves that she was a bharya, that is to be fed and therefore constantly in a bond under the husband, and in-laws for her maintenance. So just like the servants, she had to facilitate the plunder of the Istridhan by the in-laws. Only the very rich women or very powerful women like queens, whose wealth was augmented by political power, had real control over their money. Here one can also discuss widows' property rights. Once the woman lost her husband, society began to look down upon her as a financial liability and a menace. In an agricultural society where the joint family was the unit, the threat of segmenting the cultivable land owned by the family was very real, and no family wanted to face that reality. This could happen if at the husband's death the land came to the widow, she remarried, and her new husband was to be given her share of the land. So therefore, such objectionable situations had to be avoided at all the costs. Most of the lawmakers stipulated that the widow should be burned alive with the corpse of her husband, or if she was allowed to live at all, the lawgivers made her life a living hell by enforcing norms of chastity with no economic security whatsoever. Then if we discuss the issue of widow remarriage, then Parashar called her a Punarbhu, who forfeits her rights to her husband's property in case she decided to remarry. In the areas largely controlled by the Daya Bhaga rules, widows did inherit the husband's property, which they could not do in the areas under the Mitakshara school of law. The economic problem of widows was considerably complicated by polygamy and by the social weightage that had been given to the mother of a male child. Widows with daughters only or childless widows suffered economically and generally had to fall back on their parents or brothers for their survival. At their in-laws' places, they were looked down upon as an imposed liability. Some smritis upheld the widow's claim to maintenance while others to bare subsistence, but no one spoke about her rights. Then if we discuss the position of lawmakers on rape, then a master raping a maid servant was treated rather leniently. Yajnavalkya stated that a man pays 10 panas for raping a maid servant, 24 panas for raping a female religious mendicant, which clearly indicated that a female servant had no standing or respect in society. The position of women in society rendered her quite vulnerable to man's lust, and such men, with the connivance of the lawgivers and with social sanction, went their own ways and were hardly punished. Literature conveys that mostly the rapists went scot-free. Besides, laws and customs were so lenient to upper caste men that women of the so-called lower castes were easily available without any payment. In this background, one can also discuss the issue of unchaste wives. The idea of a false wife was very popular in the contemporary literature. So, a false wife was to be kept imprisoned in a room on an allowance of daily subsistence only. A wife violating the duties of chastity underwent penance. She was to be kept under guard and given very meager food. An adulterous woman had to be deprived of her authority over the servants. She was made to wear dirty clothes and again was deprived of food. And if she conceived from the other man, then she had to be driven away. Here one can mention Vashishta's observance on adultery. Vashishta mentioned that wives of the three upper castes committing adultery with the fourth varna should be driven away. If the wife tries to kill the husband or the instructor, then also she should be driven away. Gautama laid down that if a wife of the upper three castes committed adultery, then she should be devoured by dogs in public place. Literature showed that foreign wives were cursed, punished, abandoned, and even killed. It is in this background that we also come across some women who emerged as more powerful than the rest and as donors. The Shatapatha Brahmana of 8th and 7th century BCE said that the wife had no property rights, nor had she any right over her own body. Yet there were some women donors in society. This included not only queens but also female Jain disciples or wives of rich merchants. The wife of a caravan leader or a female lay disciple of ascetics, they gave various kinds of gifts to the pious Jain brethren and the temples. And one can also mention a number of land grants that were made by rich women, especially queens. For example, Amrapali gifted a groove which is mentioned in Brahatakalpa Bhasya Sutra. Then Anantha Pindaka's daughter fed Buddha and thousands of his disciples from her own money. Then there were several gifts that were given by courtesans and other Buddhist women who donated monasteries, chaityas, viharas, grooves, bridges, wells, ponds and money as well. During the 5th century, Chandragupta II's daughter, Queen Prabhavati, gave several gifts. In the Bhaumika dynasty in Odisha, there is a list of 6 queens out of a total of 17 kings who donated lavishly. women from royal or noble or merchant families could and did make gifts from their istridhan. At times, donations were made in the name of pious, powerful or famous women. In the 2nd century BCE, Vatsyayana openly stated about women in different contexts that about the maiden and about the prostitute that they should dress up richly and attractively because ultimately women were a commodity. So, here one can mention the position of Ganikas. Rich Ganikas who ran their own establishments owned the wealth they earned after paying the state tax. A sense of moral guilt often promoted them to spend substantial portions of their wealth in several pious enterprises. The courtesan who earned her own money and sometimes was so rich that the king and the merchants had to recognize her power was occasionally free to wield power in society through her money. However, these were only exceptions. The ordinary housewives, maids or widows were quite under the control of men of their families because their labor at home, however heavy, however important, was considered as unimportant and unproductive. Thank you.